Fido pressed her back against the cold brick wall of the alley, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. The dim streetlight overhead cast eerie shadows, and the distant hum of traffic was the only sound in the silence of the night. She felt her hands trembling as she clutched the strap of her worn-out backpack. "Little one," came the voice, deep, commanding, kind, but with an edge that made her shiver. She flinched, but refused to look at him. His tall frame loomed closer, casting a shadow that swallowed her whole. She felt the warmth of his presence, the subtle scent of cologne mixed with leather and wood. "Why are you avoiding me?" he asked, his voice low yet sharp. She finally dared to look up, her wide eyes meeting his piercing blue ones. His face was close now, too close. He leaned in slightly, brushing a stray strand of her curly hair away from her face. I wasn't avoiding you," she stammered, her accent thick with her Nigerian roots. He smirked, tilting his head as if to assess the truth in her words. "Don't lie to me, Fido. You've been avoiding me all week, running every time you see me. Why?" "I'm sorry," she whispered, swallowing hard. I promise it'll stop." His gaze softened for a moment, but his presence was still overwhelming. He stepped back slightly, giving her room to breathe, yet she still felt trapped. "Good," he said simply. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Don't make promises you can't keep, little one." Her heart pounded as she nodded quickly, her feet already itching to flee. He seemed to sense it and stepped aside, giving her a clear path. "You can go now," he said, his voice laced with amusement. Without a second thought, Fido bolted, her sneakers slapping against the pavement as she ran. She didn't stop until she reached the small, two-bedroom apartment she now called home. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the faint aroma of jollof rice her mother had cooked earlier. Fido locked the door behind her, her chest still heaving as she leaned against it. "Fido? Is that you?" Her mother's voice called from the tiny kitchen. "Yes, Mama," she replied, trying to steady her breathing. Her mother appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. She was a small woman with soft features, her eyes lined with worry from the years of raising Fido alone. "Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" her mother asked, her brows furrowing. "It's nothing, Mama," Fido said quickly, avoiding her gaze. "Just tired from school." Her mother didn't look convinced, but didn't press further. "Go and rest. You've been working too hard since we moved here." Fido nodded and slipped into her tiny room. It was sparsely decorated, a twin bed pushed against the wall, a small desk cluttered with books, and a single window that overlooked the quiet street below. She sank onto the bed, burying her face in her hands. Her mind raced. Why was he so persistent? Why did he keep showing up at every turn? And why did he call her little one with that strange mix of affection and authority? Her thoughts drifted to the day they arrived in this small American town. It had been a whirlwind, a new country, a new school, and a new life. Her mother had been excited, optimistic about the opportunities this place could offer them. "Well, make it here, Fido," her mother had said on their first night in the cramped apartment. "It's not much now, but this is the land of dreams." But Fido didn't feel like she was living a dream. The kids at school looked at her like she was an alien, her thick accent and dark skin setting her apart in a sea of pale faces. And then there was him, the white boy who seemed to appear out of nowhere, always watching, always asking questions. She sighed, lying back on the bed and staring at the ceiling. She didn't even know his name. All she knew was the intensity in his eyes and the way his voice made her skin crawl. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite place. "Why me?" she whispered to herself, the question hanging in the air like a shadow. From the other room, she heard her mother humming an old Yoruba tune, her voice a comforting reminder of home. But for Fido, home felt like a lifetime away. Her eyes fluttered shut, exhaustion overtaking her. But even in her dreams, she couldn't escape the piercing blue eyes and the lingering question, what did he want from her? The cool night air carried the scent of pine and earth as Seth sat on the stone steps of the pack house. The massive wooden structure loomed behind him, a testament to centuries of werewolf lineage. Despite its size, Seth felt small in the shadow of his thoughts. He ran a hand through his dark hair, his leg bouncing with restless energy. Next to him, Edward leaned back against the railing, his usual easy grin absent as he studied his best friend. "You're going to wear a hole in those jeans if you keep that up," Edward said, motioning to Seth's bouncing knee. Seth stopped, exhaling sharply. "I can't help it, man. She's all I can think about." "Fido?" Edward asked, even though he already knew the answer. Seth nodded, his jaw tightening. "She's different. I can't explain it, Ed. The way she looks at me, like I'm some kind of monster, it's driving me crazy." Edward chuckled softly. "Well, to be fair, you kind of are a monster." Seth shot him a glare, but there was no real anger behind it. "You know what I mean? She's human. She doesn't understand what's happening. Hell, I don't even fully understand it." Edward leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You're overthinking it. She's scared because you're coming on too strong. You've got to take it slow." "I can't take it slow," Seth snapped, then immediately regretted it. He rubbed his face with his hands, his voice softer when he spoke again. "I've tried, Ed. I really have. But every time I'm near her, my wolf, he just loses it. It's like he's clawing at me to get closer, to claim her." "That's the mate bond," Edward said simply. Seth shook his head. "It's more than that. She's not just a mate, Ed, she's the mate. My true mate. And she doesn't even know what that means." Edward whistled low, leaning back. "Damn, that's tough." "Tough doesn't even begin to cover it," Seth muttered. "Do you know how hard it is to control myself when I see her? The way she looks at me with those big brown eyes, like I'm some kind of predator? She's terrified of me, Ed. And I can't blame her." Edward studied him for a moment, then said, "So what's your plan?" "You can't exactly tell her, 'Hey, I'm a werewolf and you're my destined mate. By the way, I might lose control and shift if you keep running from me.'" Seth groaned, leaning back against the step. "That's the problem. I don't have a plan. Every time I try to talk to her, I make it worse. Tonight, she promised to stop avoiding me, but the second I let her go, she ran like her life depended on it." Edward smirked. "Well, to be fair, you did call her little one. That's not exactly subtle. It's what my wolf calls her," Seth said defensively. "I can't help it." Edward shook his head, laughing softly. "You're hopeless." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Seth said dryly. "Listen," Edward said, his tone turning serious. "You've got to slow down. She's human. She doesn't feel the mate bond like we do. To her, you're just some guy who keeps showing up and acting intense." Seth frowned. "I don't mean to scare her. I'm just drawn to her. It's like there's this magnetic pull, and the more I try to resist it, the stronger it gets." "Then stop resisting," Edward said. Seth looked at him sharply. "What?" "Stop resisting," Edward repeated. "But don't overwhelm her either. Be patient. Get to know her. Let her get to know you, not the wolf, just you. The human side of you." Seth ran a hand through his hair again, considering Edward's words. "And what if she never accepts me? What if she finds out what I am and runs for good?" Edward shrugged. "Then at least you know you tried. But I don't think she will. If she's really your mate, then she's stronger than you think. Humans can surprise you, Seth." Seth sighed, the weight of his predicament pressing down on him. "I just don't want to push her away even more. She's already so scared of me." "Then stop giving her a reason to be scared," Edward said simply. "Be kind. Be patient. And for the love of the moon, stop calling her little one." Seth couldn't help but laugh at that, the sound easing some of the tension in his chest. "You're right. I've been an idiot." Edward grinned. "You said it, not me." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. But Seth's thoughts remained on Fido, on her wide eyes, her trembling voice, and the way she looked at him like he was something to fear. "It'll take it slow," he said finally, more to himself than to Edward. "It'll make her see that she has nothing to be afraid of." "That's the spirit," Edward said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Just don't forget to breathe. You're acting like this is life or death." "It is life or death," Seth muttered under his breath. But Edward didn't hear him, and Seth wasn't sure he wanted him to. Because deep down, Seth knew that Fido wasn't just his mate. She was his salvation. And if he lost her, he wasn't sure he'd survive. The sun was barely up when Fido heard her mother calling her from the kitchen. The small apartment smelled of freshly brewed coffee and toast, though the faint scent of last night's jollof rice lingered in the air. "Hurry up, Fido. You don't want to be late for school," her mother called, her voice cheerful despite the early hour. Fido dragged herself out of bed, slipping into a simple blouse and jeans before heading to the kitchen. Her mother stood by the counter, her work uniform neat and pressed. "Morning, Mama," Fido mumbled, taking a seat at the tiny table. "Morning, my dear," her mother said, setting a plate of toast and eggs in front of her. "Eat quickly. I need to drop you off before heading to work." Fido nodded, eating in silence as her mother bustled around the kitchen. Despite her mother's optimism about their new life in America, Fido couldn't shake the loneliness that hung over her. The drive to school was quiet, the old car rattling slightly as it made its way through the suburban streets. Fido stared out the window, her thoughts wandering. Her mother glanced at her briefly. "You're quiet this morning," her mother said. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Mama," Fido replied, though her tone lacked conviction. Her mother gave her a look, but didn't press further. When they arrived at the school, she leaned over and kissed Fido's forehead. "Have a good day, my dear. And remember, you're strong, no matter what." Fido nodded, stepping out of the car and watching as her mother drove off toward her job at the local diner. Inside the school, Fido made her way through the crowded hallways, her eyes scanning for the one person who made her feel less out of place. She spotted Aisha near the lockers, her hijab a bright splash of color in the otherwise dull corridor. "Hey, Fido," Aisha greeted with a warm smile. "Hi, Aisha," Fido said, feeling a bit of her tension ease. Aisha was the first friend Fido had made since moving to America. Unlike the other students who either ignored her or made fun of her accent, Aisha had approached her during lunch on her first week of school and sat with her. They walked to their first class together, Aisha chatting about her weekend while Fido listened, occasionally nodding or laughing at her friend's stories. The day passed uneventfully until lunch. The cafeteria buzzed with noise as students gathered in their usual groups. Fido and Aisha sat at their corner table, away from the chaos. "Do you want some of my fries?" Aisha offered, pushing her tray toward Fido. Fido shook her head. "No, thank you. I'm not very hungry." Aisha leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Don't look now, but Seth is staring at you." Fido froze, her heart skipping a beat. "What? Where?" "By the door," Aisha said, nodding subtly in that direction. "He's been watching you since we sat down." Fido dared a quick glance, her stomach tightening when she saw him. Seth stood near the cafeteria entrance, his piercing blue eyes locked on her. "Why is he looking at me?" Fido whispered, her voice shaky. Aisha shrugged. "Maybe he likes you?" "No," Fido said firmly, shaking her head. He's just weird. I don't want anything to do with him." "Then why does he keep staring at you?" Aisha pressed. "I don't know," Fido admitted, her appetite gone. "I need to go back to class." She stood abruptly, grabbing her tray and heading for the door. Aisha called after her, but Fido didn't stop. She needed space to breathe, to think. Fido entered the empty classroom, the quiet a stark contrast to the noise of the cafeteria. She sat at her desk, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to calm her racing thoughts. Running away again? The voice made her jump. She turned sharply to see Seth standing in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the exit. What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling. Seth stepped inside, his movements slow and deliberate. "You're avoiding me again, little one." "I'm not," Fido said quickly, though she didn't sound convincing even to herself. Seth smirked, his eyes glinting with something she couldn't place. "I don't like liars, Fido." She stood, backing away until her back hit the wall. "Please, just leave me alone." He closed the distance between them in an instant, his hand resting against the wall beside her head. "I can't do that," he said softly, though his tone held an edge. "You're coming to the amusement park with me tonight." "What?" she whispered, her eyes wide. "Why would I?" "You'll come," he interrupted, his voice low and firm. "Or you'll face the consequences." Fido swallowed hard, her heart racing. "What consequences?" Seth leaned closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "You don't want to find out." She nodded slowly, her breath shallow. "Good," he said, stepping back. "I'll see you tonight." Without another word, he turned and left, leaving Fido trembling in the empty classroom. She slid down the wall, her knees weak as the weight of his words settled over her. What had she gotten herself into? Fido stumbled into their small apartment after school, her mind still reeling from Seth's words. The tension in her chest was suffocating, and all she wanted to do was escape her thoughts. Without changing out of her clothes, she collapsed onto her bed, the weight of the day dragging her into a fitful sleep. She woke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. The orange glow of the evening sun filtered through her curtains, casting her room in a warm light. Groggily, she picked up the phone and saw her mother's name flashing on the screen. "Hello, Mama," she answered, sitting up. "Fido, I was just checking in," her mother's voice came, warm and full of love. "How was school?" "It was fine," Fido lied, running a hand through her messy hair. "Good, good. What are you doing now?" Fido hesitated before replying. "Actually, I was invited out tonight." "Out? With who?" her mother asked, surprise evident in her tone. "Just a friend," Fido said carefully. Her mother paused for a moment before laughing softly. "That's wonderful, my dear. I was beginning to worry you were keeping to yourself too much." Fido forced a small smile. "Yeah, I'll be nice." "Do you need me to come home early?" No, I'll manage," Fido assured her. Her mother hummed in approval. "All right then, be safe, and call me if you need anything." "I will," Fido promised. "Love you, Mama." "Love you too." After hanging up, Fido stood and stretched, her nerves creeping back as she remembered where she was going. With a sigh, she rummaged through her small wardrobe, finally pulling out a simple but pretty dress. It was a soft shade of blue, one her mother had insisted on buying during a rare shopping trip. As she got ready, Fido's mind wandered to the first time she had met Seth. She hadn't known him at the time. He was just a stranger in need of help. It was her second week in town, and she had been walking home from school when she saw him crouched by the side of the road, his motorcycle seemingly broken down. Without thinking, she had approached and offered her help. "Do you need a hand?" she had asked hesitantly. Seth had looked up, surprise flickering across his face before he smiled. "I wouldn't say no." She had held his tools and even handed him her water bottle, unaware that the moment would tie her to him in ways she couldn't yet understand. Shaking off the memory, Fido checked her reflection in the mirror. The dress fit her snugly, and her curls framed her face. She looked nice, but her heart pounded with apprehension. She booked a taxi, and by the time it arrived, she had calmed herself somewhat. The drive to the amusement park felt longer than it was, her thoughts spiraling with worry and curiosity. When she arrived, the park was eerily quiet. The usual hum of laughter and chatter was absent, and the ride stood still under the soft glow of string lights. She stepped out of the taxi, clutching her purse tightly as she glanced around. "Fido." Her heart leaped at the sound of Seth's voice. She turned to see him standing a few feet away, dressed casually but still commanding an intimidating presence. You booked the whole park?" she asked, her voice trembling. Seth smirked. "I wanted tonight to be special." Fido hesitated, but nodded. That's thoughtful. Come, he said, extending his hand. She hesitated again before taking it, her small hand dwarfed by his. He led her to the first ride, a carousel. The soft music filled the silence as the ride started, and for a moment, Fido forgot her fear. As the evening went on, Seth showed her a different side of himself. He was attentive, guiding her through the park with ease. They rode the Ferris wheel, where he pointed out the lights of the town below. They played games, and to her surprise, he was terrible at them, which made her laugh for the first time in weeks. You're enjoying yourself, Seth noted as they walked toward the snack stand. I guess I am, Fido admitted, her guard lowering. Seth handed her a cone of cotton candy. You're different when you're relaxed. Fido looked up at him, her cheeks heating. And you're not as scary as I thought you were. Seth chuckled, his eyes softening. Good to know. By the time the night ended, Fido felt a strange mix of emotions. She was still wary of Seth, but he had shown her kindness she hadn't expected. He walked her to the taxi waiting outside the park, opening the door for her. I'll see you soon, little one, he said, his voice low but sincere. Fido nodded, slipping into the car. As the vehicle pulled away, she glanced back to see him watching her, his figure silhouetted against the lights of the park. Her heart felt lighter, but her mind was filled with questions. Who was Seth really? And why did he care so much about her? Fido sat on the edge of the bleachers, the sun warm on her skin as she watched the boys play football during physical education. She had excused herself from participating, citing her fragile health. Her teacher hadn't pressed her, which she appreciated. The sound of the ball being kicked, the shouts of teammates, and the occasional laughter filled the air. Fido rested her chin on her knees, letting the chaos of the game distract her from her lingering thoughts about Seth. Hey! A voice interrupted her musings. Fido looked up to see a boy with a friendly smile standing in front of her. He had sandy brown hair and bright green eyes that crinkled as he smiled. Mind if I sit? He asked, gesturing to the spot beside her. Sure, Fido replied hesitantly, shifting to make room. I'm Jake, he introduced himself as he plopped down beside her. Fido, she replied softly, unsure of his intentions. I've seen you around. You're new, right? Yeah, my mom and I just moved here a few weeks ago. Cool. How are you liking it so far? Jake asked, his tone genuinely curious. Fido hesitated. It's different. I'm still getting used to it. Jake nodded. Small towns can be tough at first, but you'll fit in. You seem nice. Thanks, Fido murmured, surprised by his kindness. They continued to talk, Jake doing most of the talking while Fido offered small responses. She felt her nerves easing slightly, and for the first time, she thought she might have found another friend. But their moment was interrupted by a low growl that sent shivers down Fido's spine. She turned her head to see Seth standing on the edge of the field, his eyes locked on them, blazing with fury. Oh no, Fido whispered, her heart sinking. Is that guy your boyfriend or something? Jake asked, noticing her reaction. No, he's just. Fido trailed off, unable to find the words. Seth began to move toward them, his movements predatory and deliberate. Fido stood up, panic surging through her. Seth, stop. She called out, but it was as if he couldn't hear her. By the time he reached them, his eyes were a dangerous shade, his breathing heavy. You, he growled at Jake, his voice barely human. Get away from her. Jake stood, holding up his hands. Hey, man, we were just talking. Seth didn't respond. Instead, he lunged, and Jake barely managed to step back in time to avoid his swing. Seth, Fido screamed, stepping between them. Stop it. What are you doing? Seth froze, his chest heaving as he looked at her. For a moment, she thought he might calm down, but then he let out a roar of frustration and collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. Fido, stay back. A voice called out. She turned to see Edward and a few other boys rushing over. Edward knelt beside Seth, speaking to him in a low voice. "He's losing control," Edward said to one of the others. "We need to get him out of here." Two of the boys grabbed Seth by the arms, struggling to lift him as he thrashed. Edward turned to Fido. "Go home, Fido. This isn't something you should see." "But, please," Edward insisted. "It's for your safety." Reluctantly, Fido nodded and backed away, her heart pounding as she watched them carry Seth off the field. Hours later, Fido sat on the couch in her living room, still shaken by what had happened. The sound of her phone ringing startled her, and she quickly answered. "Hello? Fido, this is Seth's mother, Luna Evelyn," a calm and commanding voice said on the other end. "Oh, hi," Fido replied nervously. "I need you to come to our house. Seth isn't doing well, and I believe seeing you might help." Fido hesitated. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "Please," Luna Evelyn said, her tone softening. "You're the only one who can calm him right now." After a moment's thought, Fido agreed. "Okay, Ilkon." When Fido arrived at the pack house, Luna Evelyn greeted her at the door. The woman was beautiful and regal, her presence commanding yet kind. "Thank you for coming," Evelyn said, leading Fido inside. They walked down a hallway to a room where Seth was lying on a bed, his face pale and his breathing labored. Fido hesitated in the doorway, unsure of what to do. "Go to him," Evelyn encouraged gently. Fido stepped inside, her heart pounding as she approached the bed. "Seth?" she called softly. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment they held a wild, feral look before softening when they landed on her. "Fido," he rasped, his voice weak. "I'm here," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. He reached out, his hand trembling as he took hers. "I'm sorry for scaring you." Fido's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. "It's okay," she whispered. "Just rest." As she sat with him, she couldn't help but wonder about the world Seth came from, one filled with secrets she was only beginning to uncover. The morning was crisp and bright as Fido and her mother stepped out of their small home, holding a basket of snacks and a bouquet of fresh flowers. Her mother, dressed in her usual vibrant Ankara blouse, seemed unusually cheerful. "It's nice to show kindness, Fido," her mother said as they got into their little car. "Especially to people who have been kind to us." Fido glanced at her mother from the passenger seat, unsure how to express her growing unease about Seth. He had been strange, intense, and now even more enigmatic after what had happened at school. But her mother had insisted they visit him after hearing from Luna Evelyn that Seth was recovering well. As they drove, her mother hummed softly to an old Nigerian tune playing on the radio, while Fido stared out the window, her mind racing. At the pack house, Luna Evelyn greeted them warmly. "Fido, Mrs. Amici, thank you so much for coming. Seth will be glad to see you." Fido followed her mother and Evelyn into the grand living room, where Seth sat on a large leather couch. He looked healthier than the last time she'd seen him, though there was still a guarded look in his eyes. "Hi," Fido said softly, holding out the bouquet. Seth's lips curled into a small smile as he took the flowers. "Thank you, little one." Fido bristled at the nickname, but said nothing. She placed the basket of snacks on the coffee table, and her mother began chatting with Luna Evelyn, leaving Fido and Seth alone. "I'm glad you're feeling better," Fido said, sitting awkwardly in a chair across from him. "I'm better because of you," Seth replied, his gaze unwavering. The intensity of his stare made her shift uncomfortably. "It wasn't just me. Your mom and friends helped too." Seth shook his head. "You don't understand, Fido. You're different, special." Before Fido could respond, her mother called her over. "Fido, let's not stay too long. Seth needs to rest." She nodded, relieved. As they left, Seth walked them to the door. He didn't say much, but gave Fido a look that stayed with her the entire drive home. The next day, Seth was back at school, but something had changed. He seemed even more reserved, his usual playful smirk replaced by a stern, authoritative demeanor. Fido first noticed it in the hallway, when she accidentally bumped into someone while retrieving a book from her locker. "Watch where you're going," the girl snapped. Before Fido could apologize, Seth appeared out of nowhere, his voice cold and commanding. "Is there a problem here?" The girl froze. "And no, Seth. Sorry." She scurried away, and Seth turned to Fido. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone softer but still firm. "I'm fine," Fido replied, feeling a mix of gratitude and irritation. "I can handle myself, you know." Seth didn't respond, but the look in his eyes said otherwise. During lunch, Fido sat with her friend Aisha, trying to enjoy her meal when Seth's authoritative presence loomed again. "Fido," he said, standing at the edge of their table. "I need to talk to you." Fido sighed. "Can it wait?" "I'm eating." "No," Seth replied, his voice leaving no room for argument. Aisha gave Fido a curious look, and Fido reluctantly stood, following Seth out of the cafeteria. "What is it?" she asked once they were alone. "I don't like the way Jake looks at you," Seth said bluntly. Fido's jaw dropped. "Excuse me? Jake is just being friendly." "He doesn't get to be friendly with you," Seth snapped, his usual composure cracking. Fido crossed her arms. "You don't get to decide who I talk to, Seth. You're not my keeper." Seth stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You don't understand, Fido. It's not safe for you to be around other guys." "Not safe?" Fido echoed, her frustration bubbling over. "Seth, I'm human. I don't live by your rules or whatever world you're part of. Stop trying to control me." For a moment, Seth looked stunned, as if no one had ever spoken to him that way. But then his expression softened. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I care about you." Fido's anger faltered at the vulnerability in his voice, but she wasn't ready to let it go completely. "You need to respect my boundaries, Seth," she said firmly. He nodded, though the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. "I'll try." As Fido walked back to the cafeteria, she couldn't help but feel that things with Seth were only going to get more complicated. The invitation came in the form of an elegant letter sealed with a silver wax stamp. Luna Evelyn had invited Fido, Aisha, and a few other girls from school to a special week-long program at the Pack House. The letter mentioned bonding activities, self-discovery, and an exciting gala at the end. Aisha squealed with delight when she read hers. "Can you believe it, Fido? A week at that gorgeous mansion. I'm already packing." Fido wasn't as enthusiastic. Something about the Pack House unsettled her, and the thought of spending a whole week there felt suffocating. But Aisha's excitement was infectious, and her mother's encouragement sealed the deal. "It's a great opportunity to make more friends and experience something new," her mother said as she helped Fido pack. When they arrived at the Pack House, Fido was awestruck by the grandeur of it all. The house was buzzing with activity as girls were welcomed by the Luna herself. Evelyn was all smiles, radiating warmth and charm as she guided them to their rooms. Each girl was given a luxurious room with a view of the sprawling grounds. Fido's room had soft, lavender-scented sheets and a balcony overlooking a forest. It was beautiful, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The first few days were filled with activities designed to integrate them into the Pack's lifestyle. There were cooking lessons, hikes through the woods, and even a self-defense class. Luna Evelyn often spoke about unity, loyalty, and the importance of bonds. By the third day, subtle hints about werewolves began to emerge. Evelyn mentioned pack dynamics during one of her talks, and some of the boys exhibited uncanny agility and strength during a game of tag. Fido noticed Aisha whispering excitedly with some of the other girls. "What's going on?" Fido asked. "They're talking about the werewolf thing," Aisha said, her eyes sparkling with intrigue. Fido froze. "Werewolf thing?" Aisha laughed. "You haven't figured it out?" "Seth, the Luna, this whole pack, Fido, they're werewolves." Fido's stomach dropped. "You're joking." "Nope. And honestly, it's kind of cool," Aisha said. That evening, Evelyn gathered the girls for a candlelit dinner and officially revealed the truth. You've all been chosen to be part of something extraordinary, Evelyn said, her voice calm and persuasive. The world of werewolves is not just about power. It's about family, love, and loyalty. We invited you here because we believe you might be destined to be a part of our world. Most of the girls were intrigued, even excited. Aisha leaned over to Fido. See? Nothing to worry about. But Fido's heart raced. She couldn't accept this so easily. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need some air, she stammered, leaving the room. Luna Evelyn found her outside, sitting on the steps. Fido, I know this is a lot to take in. I don't belong here, Fido said, her voice trembling. Evelyn placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You belong more than you think. Give it time. Aisha joined them, wrapping an arm around Fido. You're not alone in this, Fido. I'm here, okay? Fido nodded reluctantly, though the unease lingered. The next evening, the festivities were interrupted when Fido disappeared. She had been seen walking in the gardens, but never returned. When Seth heard the news, he went berserk. His wolf took over, and he tore through the forest, searching for her scent. The pack mobilized immediately, with Evelyn coordinating the search. Fido woke up in a dimly lit cabin, her hands bound. She recognized one of her captors as a rogue werewolf shed seen, lurking near the pack house. Why are you doing this? She demanded, her voice shaky but defiant. You're important to the pack, the rogue sneered. Which makes you valuable to us. Seth's senses led him to the cabin. He burst in, a growl ripping from his throat as he faced the rogues. They didn't stand a chance against his fury. Fido, he whispered, untying her bonds with trembling hands. Are you okay? Fido nodded, tears streaming down her face. She clung to him as he carried her out. Back at the pack house, Luna Evelyn and Aisha rushed to her side. You're safe now, Evelyn assured her. Fido looked at Seth, who hadn't left her side. For the first time, she felt a flicker of trust. Maybe, just maybe, she could find her place here. Fido's room was quiet, the only sound being the soft rustle of leaves outside her window. She lay on her bed, trying to process everything that had happened. The rogues, the pack, the overwhelming truth about werewolves. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, leaving her sleepless. A soft knock on her balcony door startled her. She sat up, her heart pounding. Fido, it's me, Seth's voice called out softly. She hesitated for a moment before walking to the door and opening it. Seth stood there, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. You shouldn't be here, she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. I couldn't stay away, he said, stepping inside. After everything that's happened, I needed to see you. Seth's presence was magnetic. He moved closer, his gaze soft and unwavering. You've been through so much, Fido. I just want to make sure you're okay. Fido looked away, feeling vulnerable under his gaze. I'm fine, Seth. You don't need to worry about me. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. I always worry about you. Her cheeks flushed at his touch. Why do you care so much? Seth let out a soft chuckle, his voice tinged with emotion. Because you're my everything, Fido. You're my mate. Fido's eyes widened. Mate? It's a bond deeper than anything you can imagine, he explained, his voice earnest. I've felt it from the moment I saw you. And now I just want to protect you, to make you happy. Fido's heart raced. The intensity in his words and his closeness made her feel both scared and drawn to him. This is all so new to me, she said softly. I know, Seth said, stepping back slightly to give her space. It'll take things slow, but I needed you to know how I feel. The next evening, the pack house was transformed into a shimmering wonderland for the mating party. Twinkling fairy lights adorned the trees, and soft music played in the background. The girls, dressed in flowing gowns provided by the pack, looked ethereal as they mingled and danced. Fido felt a mix of awe and apprehension as she stood with Aisha. "This is so beautiful," Aisha said, spinning in her emerald green dress. "It is," Fido admitted, though her nerves kept her from fully enjoying the moment. Edward approached Aisha, his eyes lighting up as he saw her. "May I have this dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Aisha blushed but nodded, allowing him to lead her to the dance floor. Fido watched them, a small smile on her lips, until she felt a familiar presence behind her. "Fido." Seth's voice was low and warm. She turned to see him dressed sharply, his golden eyes locked on her. "You look stunning," he said, his voice filled with admiration. Fido felt her cheeks heat up. "Thank you." "Dance with me," he said, holding out his hand. Hesitating for only a moment, she placed her hand in his. He led her to the dance floor, where they moved in perfect sync to the soft music. As the night went on, the Luna made a special announcement. "Tonight, we celebrate the bonds that bring us together," Evelyn said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "To those who have found their mates, may your journeys be filled with love and strength." One by one, couples were revealed as mates through the magical pull of their bond. Aisha and Edward beamed with joy as they embraced, their bond confirmed. When it was Fido's turn, the room seemed to hold its breath. Seth stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "Fido," he said softly, taking her hand. The warmth that spread through her at his touch was undeniable. The bond between them was real, tangible, and unbreakable. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, "I don't know if I'm ready for this." Seth pulled her close, his voice gentle. "You don't have to be ready all at once. We'll take this step by step, together." The party ended with laughter and celebration, but Fido's heart was full of questions. As Seth walked her back to her room, she looked up at him. "Why me, Seth? Out of all the people in the world, why am I your mate?" He smiled, his golden eyes soft. "Because fate has a way of bringing the right people together, little one. And you're my fate." For the first time, Fido felt a small flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could embrace this new world. Months had passed since that fateful night at the mating party, and Fido had slowly begun to adjust to her new life. The initial fear and uncertainty that had once consumed her had started to fade, replaced by a sense of comfort whenever she was near Seth. He had been patient with her, guiding her through the complexities of their bond while respecting her boundaries. Their bond wasn't just physical, it was emotional and spiritual, a connection that went beyond the supernatural. Seth and Fido had become inseparable, spending countless hours together, whether it was in the quiet moments at home or out with Aisha and Edward. They had become a close-knit group, going on double dates, exploring the town, and visiting each other's houses. Laughter and light-hearted banter had filled their lives, creating memories that Fido cherished deeply. One evening, after a particularly fun outing with Aisha and Edward, Fido and Seth walked side by side back to their home. The cool night air made the stars above seem even brighter, and as they walked, Seth's hand brushed against hers. "You know," Seth said, his voice gentle but filled with a touch of mischief, "I think I'm starting to get used to this life. The one with you by my side." Fido smiled up at him, her heart fluttering. "I think I'm starting to get used to it too," she replied, her voice soft. "I'm glad," Seth said, his eyes meeting hers. "You were always meant to be here with me. I knew it from the moment we met." Fido laughed lightly. "You're starting to sound like a hopeless romantic." He grinned. "Maybe I am, but it's because I know what we have is something special." She looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "It is special, Seth. I never imagined I'd end up here, but I'm so happy I did." The last year of high school came with its own set of challenges, but Fido faced them with Seth by her side. Their relationship only grew stronger, and the love that blossomed between them was undeniable. They supported each other through the stress of exams and college preparations, always knowing they had each other's backs. When they graduated, the world seemed wide open, full of possibilities. They had both made plans for the future, but Fido knew that no matter where life took her, Seth would be there. After graduation, Seth proposed in the most intimate way possible, under the stars, in the very same spot where they had first shared a dance. It wasn't just the beauty of the moment that took Fido's breath away. It was the sincerity in his eyes as he asked her to be his forever. "Yes, Seth," Fido said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Their wedding was a simple affair, surrounded by friends and family. The pack was there, of course, as were Aisha and Edward, who stood proudly by their sides as the couple exchanged vows. The ceremony wasn't grand, but it was perfect in every way. Seth had become the alpha by then, his leadership qualities recognized by the pack. It wasn't an easy transition, but he handled it with strength and grace. Fido stood by him, supporting him through the challenges that came with his new role. The day after their wedding, Fido moved into Seth's house, and their new life began. The house was cozy and welcoming, filled with the warmth of their love. They spent their days together, building a home, raising a family, and supporting each other through every twist and turn that life had to offer. Soon, Fido and Seth welcomed their first child, a beautiful baby boy with Seth's golden eyes and Fido's dark hair. It was a moment of joy and pure happiness, and Fido couldn't have asked for anything more. She had found her place in this new world, and now she had everything she had ever dreamed of. Seth had become the alpha he was always meant to be, leading with kindness and strength, while Fido stood by his side, his equal and his partner in every way. Together, they created a family full of love, laughter, and unwavering loyalty. As the years passed, Fido often looked back on the path that had brought her here. The journey had been filled with uncertainty, fear, and change, but it had also been filled with love, love for Seth, love for her new family, and love for the life they had built together. It was a life she never imagined, but now that she was living it, she knew it was everything she had ever wanted. And as Seth held her close, their children playing nearby, Fido knew deep in her heart that their bond would never break. Together, they had created a future full of hope, strength, and love.